was something that I talked about, and I wrote an article in the Daily Express probably about a month and a half ago.
Yes.
So I'm really just repeating a few points here that I've already been very open and clear about.
Sure. But it's very important to make these points, Marco, repeatedly, because we keep hearing repeatedly the same excuses that nothing's being done and then something's going to be done and then nothing happens again. I mean, Suella Braverman came in with all the force of a sort of a new crusade, and it now turns out that she seems to be already denuded of whatever power she thought she might have, and now she's talking about something not really working.
Well, she has a boss, doesn't she? And I think that that's where the power really lies, and that's at number 10. But might I point out one thing? Number 10 is very concerned about those colleagues of mine who will be, how can I put this, politically perhaps in the centre ground, as they might like to describe it. I wouldn't like to say where I would describe them, but it might offend their sensibilities if we start talking about the European Convention on Human Rights, and if we were to exit it and have our own Bill of Rights. That really offends them in a big way. What I would point out to them was that in 2005, under a Labour government, we chose to ignore European Court of Human Rights rules and regulations that the EU, through a directive, insisted upon on the whole of the European Union, including ourselves, which was to give prisoners the vote. I don't know if you remember that, Mike.
Yes, I do remember that.
And we chose to ignore it, didn't we?
Yeah.
And then Cameron and Clegg ignored it again, and we came to some kind of fudged compromise in 2012 where we said, oh, I'll tell you what, if we remand people to custody for either 6 months or 12 months, we'll perhaps consider them giving the vote. So that was a period of 7 years. It was kicked into the long grass. We, to all intents and purposes, chose through our own political will, both Labour, Conservative and Conservative Lib Dems, to do what we knew was right for the country. My question is, why aren't we doing that the same thing now when we have a national emergency? And perhaps the answer, Mike, lies in the fact that many of my own colleagues who perhaps have nice leafy suburbs where they perhaps are sitting on very, very comfortable majorities, that their own sensibilities now are being offended because they can't go for afternoon tea in a hotel that's taken over by illegal migrants. There might be coastal areas where the whole tourism economy has been completely destroyed by what is happening now. So all of a sudden, people are waking up. But I was one of only 2 or 3 MPs who's been banging on about this since 2019. I saw this train crash happening back then, and nothing has changed since then. And I'm just not going to be a pushover on this anymore.
No.
I'm not going to keep quiet. I've never been quiet about it. I'm just turning up the volume, if I'm honest.
No, I think you're absolutely right. We've been in the same boat, if you'll pardon the expression, because we have been banging the same drum as you for a lot longer than anybody else. And suddenly now people are going, oh, there's a bit of a problem here, because it is beginning to affect all sorts of different parts of society. You know, not just, you know, perhaps towns where nobody really cared about what happened there. You know, the hotels were being occupied, you know, streets were being filled with people from overseas that nobody was really prepared for, because the government has been terribly bad at communicating any of this. They haven't said, this is our policy. They've tried to make out that it was going to go away. They're now faced with a catastrophe and a crisis because the sheer numbers of people coming are ridiculous. We now hear that there might be people with diphtheria having been transported around the country because they weren't actually tested for it before they were moved out of Manston. I mean, it's just ridiculous. The whole thing is a shambles.
Well, it's not just diphtheria, is it? It's actual security. We know nothing about a lot of these people, aside from the fact that, you know, the British people are innately fair. The vast majority will say, yeah, OK, we get it over Ukrainian women and children, and we get it over some of those poor people in Afghanistan. OK, fair, OK, we'll look at that. We'll try and do our best for them. But to somehow justify that it's OK for the United Kingdom to accept 55% of asylum applications from Albanians under asylum or modern slavery laws, when most other European countries at the very best might accept between 0% and 3%, why is it that the UK has to accept 55%, Mike?
I know.
I
it
have
makes no
noticed
sense.
it. War-torn France, war-torn Albania, all of a sudden there's modern slavery everywhere. And we just accept it at face values. I'll tell you what it is, Mike, is that there's a whole business around this. There's I would suspect it's $1 billion business where you've got lefty lawyers telling a lot of these illegal immigrants exactly what to say, exactly how to fill out forms so that they comply with this. But we allow it to happen. We are in charge, and we are allowing it to happen, and it's an utter disgrace.
Yeah. Well, I think we are being made a laughingstock, quite frankly, Marco, of Europe. I mean, we saw the arrest the other day of a people smuggler, a man who turned out to have been originally, I think, an Iraqi Kurd, who was the one responsible, or he's being charged with putting that boat out to sea, the one that sank and where all those people died. You know, it's a horrible business. The people who say that we should be welcoming these people in seem to be completely unfazed by the fact that we're encouraging criminal activity, that we're actually aiding and abetting people to get into these boats and pay money to people smugglers who are criminal gangs. You know, there's no justification for it under any circumstances.
I know. And these people pay thousands and thousands of pounds to these smugglers, and then you have these charities asking the British people to donate to give them a coat.
I know.
In Calais.
I know.
You know,
it's absolutely unbelievable.
These are people who will willingly put themselves in harm's way along one of the busiest corridors that the Channel is, and then they expect the British taxpayer to bail them out. Well, I'm sorry. If you're willingly putting yourself into that position, why should the British people do that?
Exactly.